Muhteşem.
Hi! Like the title of this video says, I'm going to talk about how to not portray a culture as a villain in media. Why? Because for a lot of people, movies or games are their first and only introduction to another culture. And real talk here, most people don't fact check what they see in media. So if the media screws it up, people walk away with a wrong picture stuck in their heads. That's why it matters. In this video, I will talk about 2 examples where this went wrong. And don't worry, I'll keep this as spoiler free as I can. Let's start with number 1. For those who have never played Ghost of Tsushima, the game takes place in the island of Tsushima, during the first Mongol invasion of Japan in the year 1274. You play Jin Sakai, a samurai, and your goal is to drive off the invaders of your homeland. From what I have learned so far, the developers, Sucker Punch, did a great job at portraying Japanese culture at this time. For Western people trying to be respectful towards it, the result is beautiful. Even the Japanese loved and praised it.
僕ね、歴史学者としていつも僕は侍を古文書、古い文書で見ています。その侍が見事に生きてる。もう泣けるほど感動的です。
Also, the 2 game directors were named tourism ambassadors for the island of Tsushima.
That's crazy.
And Mongolian culture, to put it simply, the portrayal of the Mongols in this game sucks. And why is that? The developers for some reason prioritized the portrayal of Japanese culture and neglected the Mongols. For some of you who played this game, this probably sounds a bit weird, because there was no big outrage by anybody. And on the surface, it seems like Sucker Punch did their research. So what the hell am I talking about here? Let me explain. I have no real structure for that. I'll just tell you one thing after another. Starting with the invasion army. Why are there so many Mongols? Well, duh, it's the Mongol Empire. But here's the thing. The moment an empire conquers a place, everything about this place becomes part of the empire, including the people. The Mongol invasion consisted of Mongol soldiers, but a significant portion consisted of Chinese and Korean forces. The devs for some reason ignored this multi-ethnic composition and made them into one faceless enemy. Also, speaking of the Chinese, you see this armor? This is Chinese armor. And for some reason the devs never mentioned that anywhere. They put it in without any context and now players probably assume that it's Mongolian. Also, speaking of armors, you see this armor? Look especially at the mask. In this region of the world, some cultures had iron masks with mustaches. Like again, China or Tibet. But the Mongols adapted the style from one particular culture. The Cumans. Who are the Cumans? They are Turks. Nah, not those guys. They are Turkic people. What is Turkic? It's a term for all the cultures that speak Turkic languages. There are more than just the Turkish. Here's a map of all of them. Many of them are in the same area as Mongolia. And you know what? It wasn't really different in the past. The Mongols always had their own culture, traditions and identity in the past, but you can't ignore that they were deeply embedded in Turkic culture, or better said, their Khaganates. A Khaganate is a realm ruled by a Khan, like the Göktürk Khaganate or the Uyghur Khaganate. They were deeply intertwined and exchanged much with each other. Especially during the times of the Mongol Empire, when like 95% of the Turkic cultures became part of the empire, the exchange was so prominent that there is even something called the Turco-Mongol tradition. This mask, it's important for Turkic culture. It wasn't just worn by the Cumans. Many Turkic empires wore this mask, or similar versions of it, like the Karakhanids, the Khwarezmians, Khwarezmians, the Khwarezmians, or the Seljuks. Nothing of that is mentioned anywhere in the game. But honestly, it's kinda inconsequential. Overall, it's just one Turkic mask, right? So why should you bother explain this complex history to anybody? It's not like there are more Turkic references in this game. And the devs made no effort to mention them anywhere. Right? Let's go to the Mongol artifacts. The Golden Eagle. In the game you see some Mongols using eagles in battles. Eagles from the Altai Mountains of West Mongolia. Well, eagle hunting traces its roots back to Turkic tribes in Central Asia. Particularly the Khazars and the Kyrgyz. The people living in the Altai Mountains are also Turkic people. The golden eagle is even the national animal of Kazakhstan. And it's also on the flag of the country. It gets presented as something Mongolian, although it's something more Turkic. It's still Mongolian to some degree, but it's mainly Turkic. You know what I'm trying to say here? Moving on, the dagger. Something that the Mongols appropriated from Persia. You know who ruled Persia in these times, and then later was conquered by the Mongols? The Turks. The Khwarezmians, the Khwarezmians, the successor of the Seljuk Turks. And they are important here. Because the Seljuks adopted much of Persian culture when they conquered the land. Like for example the language. Much of Turkish language is influenced by Persian. But also the Turks brought stuff with them and implemented them into Persian culture. Like weapons. Before the arrival of the Seljuks, Persian weapons were straight and double-edged. But when the Seljuks came, they brought curved weapons to Persia. So this dagger is more like a Turco-Persian dagger. Curved weapons are from the nomadic people of the Eurasian steppe belt. But for some reason most people associate them with the Middle East or North Africa. Next, this helmet, which is called a Mongol helmet, but it's not really a Mongol helmet. It looks more like a fantasy version of a Kulakut helmet. This helmet originated in Iran, but again, when the Seljuks came, they adopted this helmet and added their own features to it that were of steppe nomad origin. It became a staple for many Turkic empires, even after the Mongols. The Ottomans even wore iterations of this helmet. Simply calling it a Mongol helmet is like someone making a documentary about the history of New York style pizza and then acting like New York invented pizza, completely ignoring the whole history of how it made its way from Italy to America. You know what I'm trying to say here? Moving on, the Egyptian mask. The game tells that shortly before the invasion of Tsushima, the Mongols traveled as far as North Africa, where they were defeated. You know who defeated the Mongols? The Mamluks. Who are the Mamluks? Basically, they were elite slave soldiers that ended up running Egypt, and they defeated the Mongols at Ain Jalut in 1260. And here's the thing, the Mamluks were mostly of Turkic origin, so they were familiar with war tactics of nomads from the steppe, like the infamous hit and run. Send a small gang to your enemy, retreat, and then whoop their asses. They used their own tactics against them, because they were familiar with the playbook. Next, shamanism. The game tells you about the old shamanistic religion. The game tells you about the old shamanistic religion of the Mongols by showing you altars and shamans themselves. But here's the problem. First, they don't mention the religion by name. It's Tengrinism. Second, during the time where the game takes place, Tengrinism was not the state religion of the Mongol Empire. It was Tibetan Buddhism. The shamanistic religion also kinda originates from the Turks. To put it simply, like for example, Tengrinism was the state religion of the Göktürks. But also, I won't explain it any further because then I have to talk about Proto-Mongols and Proto-Turks. And that will make everything more complicated than it already is. Also, it's important to say that there is no universal practice of Tengrinism. Every culture that practices it has their own version of it. Next, something short, but there are two Mongols in the game that have Turco-Mongol names and one with a Turkic name. Now to the last point, and the main reason why I talk about Ghost of Tsushima, and this is the Mongol saber, which is really called the Turco-Mongol saber. The only time where they mention the Turks, and that's it. What I'm trying to say with all of this is, This game has many references to Turkic cultures, and the devs made no effort to mention the Turks anywhere. They had so many chances to do that. In the past, prominent influence by the Turks on the Mongols was erased from this game. Here's what I think about the developers. Sucker Punch has an obvious bias. They love Japan. And they didn't care about portraying Mongolia in the same level of depth. They put all of their effort into portraying Japanese culture as respectful as they can, but when it came to the Mongols, their portrayal in this game is fictionalized, shallow, or incomplete. The Mongols in Ghost of Tsushima feel to me like a means to the end. They are not really the emotional core of the story. That's the feud between Jin and his uncle. The Mongols were something to push the story forward and have someone to fight. The developers only created an illusion of interest by showing you basic nomad stuff, while ignoring everything else about Mongolia. This is something that always happens when you see Mongols in media, especially in Western media. The developers of that media erase all the cultures that shape Mongol culture. Many people in this world have this idea that the Mongols just popped out of nowhere and started conquering stuff. I also want to say that I only focused on Turkic culture because that's what I know. I bet that there is more stuff from other cultures in this game without context, like from China, Tibet or Korea, but someone else with more knowledge about them has to talk about that. In the end, the portrayal of the Mongols in Ghost of Tsushima was bearable to say the least. Unlike our second candidate. Yo, test, penis. For those who have never watched the movie, 300 is an epic historical action film, and directed by Zack Snyder, based on the 1998 comic by Frank Miller. The plot is about the 300 Spartans that went into battle against the Persians. But it's a pretty famous movie and the story itself is widely known, so I don't think I have to explain much here. Frank Miller himself described 300 as a piece of Spartan propaganda, an exaggerated story told at a campfire by warriors about their enemies. It's not meant to be an accurate historical retelling, but rather how the Spartans might have imagined their own story. And you know what? I ain't buying that. That's bullshit. Because there is a lot more to it. Let me explain. I have no real structure for that again. Starting with the intro scene. It starts with a soundtrack that is just stereotypical Orientalistic music, desert vocals, Armenian duduk. Things not really associated with any of the cultures in this movie. The whole music in this movie is not culturally authentic to neither Greek or Iran. The only authentic instrument in this whole movie is the Greco-Roman aulos, which musical part was muted and overplayed by a Hollywood orchestra. Next, the Persian emissaries. Why did Frank Miller and Zack Snyder make all the hardcore evil Persians dark-skinned Africans? I mean, we talk about the Achaemenid Empire, and sure it was big, also conquered parts of Africa. But this was North Africa. The empire consisted primarily of these cultures. So dark-skinned people weren't really prominent. I will come back to that later. Also, why is Iran portrayed as Egypt? Moving on. The Persian soldiers. The movie and comic portrayed them as some stereotypical desert-looking Alibaba, Taliban, whatever guys. Again, typical Orientalistic stuff. Real Achaemenid soldiers look like this. Also, here's the historical accurate Xerxes. Next, the movie tells you that the Persians consisted of a slave army. Again, bullshit. The Achaemenid Empire had slaves, but a whole slave army and guys that carry massive thrones? That's ass. Talking about slaves, do you know that Spartans owned slaves? even that one Spartan owned a handful of slaves? The history and data on that differ much to my understanding, but the movie saying that the Spartans for a part consisted of freed slaves, that's ridiculous. Sparta is overall portrayed as some kind of anti-Arthurian state that does the right thing against the will of bureaucracy, a place of tough rebels who disagree with the boys upstairs. In reality, Sparta was one of the most authoritarian systems in the ancient world, heavy laws and little freedom. The movie even tries to tell you the false reality by Leonidas making fun of Athens and also making fun of their pederasty, relationships between older men and adolescent boys. Again, in reality, pederasty was also a part of Spartan culture. Moving on. In the movie and comics show you two Greeks who betray their culture, which is half true. In reality, people from both sides switched sides constantly. Loyalty wasn't rigid, it was political and strategic. But what is the overall point I'm trying to tell here by showing you historical inaccuracies of the comic and movie? Although the author of the comic and the movie director say that it's not meant to be historically accurate. When you look at both the comic and the movie and know your history, you notice a clear attempt of distinguishing both cultures from each other. Frank Miller said that the story is something that a Spartan might have told to his people during the war. Frank Miller's story shows how one culture fights a completely foreign enemy, but in reality, it was different. The Greco-Persian Wars were a tragic story of how entangled neighbors broke apart from each other. Greece was always connected through trade, migration and war to the east. It absorbed and even transformed many aspects of Eastern cultures. Pythagoras, for example, learned much about mathematics from the Babylonians in today's Iraq. They were like homies for a large part of their history. But when the war started, much of that changed, and the negative views of the Persians began, by calling them luxurious tyrants. And after the war, the mindset changed in some areas of Greece. One historian from ancient Greece, from whom we also know most about the Greco-Persian Wars, is Herodotus. He wrote much about the wars, and occasionally showed empathy towards the Persians for their losses, but also criticized them for being heavily arrogant. Alright, I showed you that the design of the Persians was historically inaccurate. To show you how far both Miller and Snyder went to make you believe that these are two completely different cultures. According to them, it was intentionally to evoke myth and projection. That's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Actual Iranian empires went crazy with their designs. You just had to take them. And also, why do you have to make them black to create a myth and projection and the Spartans white people from Western Europe? Here's how everything looks to me. We got two people who present the Spartans as the ultimate hardcore badass warriors from the West that hate authority, tyrants and slavery. And their enemy is a complete clusterfuck of a representation of a culture that was vilified to the core. I call bullshit. 300 is a romanticized fantasy of how an American storyteller imagines how history was told. Frank Miller and Zack Snyder didn't understand the cultures they were portraying. They created an oversimplified version of history through the narrow lens of Western Orientalistic views. And here's the most fucked up thing. When criticized, both people claim that it's only a propaganda story told by one soldier to others and that it's all exaggerated. Like I told you. When that defense wasn't enough, they claimed that people were simply misinterpreting their artistic vision. Okay, here's my most controversial claim of this video. I am not a fan of putting people into boxes, so I try to say this as carefully as I can. There is a large group of people out here in this world that have an extremely weird mindset when it comes to Greece, especially in Western society. Those people are fascinated by Greece, but not the actual Greece. They are fascinated by their idea of Greek culture. They like the things about Greek culture that is always shown to them by pop culture through a positive lens. And for some reason, they will always stand behind this view. They don't try to learn anything about the actual Greece. In their mind, it's some kind of isolated country in the Mediterranean that completely evolved on its own. They invented everything good about society, like democracy and laws, and is completely incomparable with the East. A clear case of romanticization. I am not fond of the idea that both Zack Snyder and Frank Miller are part of these people, because why else would you spend hundreds of hours making a story about a historical conflict between two cultures and portray them as complete opposites, one as the ultimate good and the other as the ultimate evil, where none of that is grounded in reality, whether intentional or not? The movie reflects the same mindset in my opinion. Even if they simply wanted to create a story, you can't ignore this habit of romanticizing Greece and vilifying the East. Also, something that has absolutely nothing to do with the video, I just want to talk about how many people in the West are under the impression that they enter completely different worlds once they cross the border from Greece to Turkey. That Greece is this European looking civilization and that Turkey for some reason is this exotic, desert, Islamic, Alibaba, Taliban land, whatever. But in reality, they're the exact same. I haven't talked this much in a while, so excuse me if I fuck some things up. Okay, I want to make one thing clear. Although I heavily criticize those two pieces of media, I am not here to cancel them. I am not saying that you shouldn't play Ghost of Tsushima. I mean, overall I told you about how the developers erased other cultures from the Mongol Empire. I still play this game from time to time, because it's fun. I also don't say that you should never watch 300 again. I bought the movie on Ultra HD, because it's still an entertaining movie. I am not anti-Western, nor am I pro-Iranian government, nor am I anti-Japanese. All I'm trying to say here is, if you like a foreign culture, then like the actual version of this culture, and not your romanticized idea of it. And if you want to create a piece of art about that culture, then don't forget to respect the cultures that are connected to it. I know that people are going to tell me that it's not a big deal, but it's easy to say when it's not one of your cultures that gets a negative portrayal, or even a romanticized portrayal that is not faithful to the original culture. Honestly, I am disappointed by Ghost of Tsushima and 300 because of all of the wrong artistic choices that the creators made. I mean, I'm pretty sure that they could have made better pieces of media. Imagine a Ghost of Tsushima that revolves around Jin Sakai's inner conflict of fighting an enemy that was forced to be on his homeland. Or imagine 300, a tragic story of how two cultures that went from close neighbors to enemies. I am all for using fantasy elements when creating a piece of media about a historical event. But when you use fantasy as an excuse to not learn anything about the cultures you portray, you're a fucking dumbass. Respectful storytelling isn't about being politically correct. It's about unlocking better, deeper, and more meaningful art. I don't know what else to say, so this is the end of the video.